Right. And I also would really like to thank Lisa Hopkins, Mary Sinker, and John Farnsworth, and also Neil and Catherine O'Hara. They were the people that put together the photo program. So thank you so much, and thanks to all the people that submitted their photographs. That was there's some really beautiful ones. So I think with that, we're ready to go, John. Thanks.
One little, sorry, we're going to do something a little bit different this evening. Is lately I've just started a 3-year appointment with the Wildlife Diversity Advisory Council with Field and Wild Department of
Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife. I was almost reverting to the California department. And I just got elected as the chair of the State Wildlife Action Plan Committee. So it's the plan we'll be using following from 2025 to 2035. And part of my job the last 6 weeks has been to read up on all the endangered, threatened, near threatened species of concern. And so I'm going to point some of those out as we go through. It has a lot to do with what we're about in Audubon. Before we start that, we have a dedication tonight. Oh, I went the wrong way. We lost a long-serving member of our board of directors, also our hiking chair recently, and I have a poem by Mary Oliver, How I Go to the Woods, to read in her memory. Ordinarily, I go to the woods alone with not a single friend, for they are all smilers and talkers, and therefore unsuitable. I don't really want to be witnessed talking to the birds or hugging the old black oak tree. I have my way of praying, as you no doubt have yours. Besides, when I am alone, I can become invisible. I can sit on the top of a dune as motionless as an uprise of weeds until the foxes run by unconcerned. I can hear the almost unhearable sound of the roses singing. If you have ever gone to the woods with me, I must love you very much. Our first set is by photographer Nancy Crowell. This is a snowy owl from Loomy Island. My little fun fact for this, all snowy owl plumages are variable, but the heavy barring seen on this bird is usually indicative of an immature female. The snowy owl's population has declined 64% since 1970 and is now listed as vulnerable and is a bird of concern by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Still by Nancy. Despite its name, the meadowlark is not a lark, but is rather a member of the blackbird family. While small populations of the western meadowlark can be found on Fur Island throughout the winter, they are no longer thought to nest here. It's still considered a widespread and common species through the American grasslands, but the populations are declining over the past several decades as they lose habitat. Nancy wrote on this one, the one remaining emperor goose, its mate was killed illegally by a hunter as witnessed by Gary Bletch. Thanks to Gary, the hunter was tracked down and busted by the Washington Wildlife officers. And I'm adding, considered a rarity here in Skagit County, the emperor goose's population is decreasing in its own range, but its current conservation status is near threat. Nancy writes about this one. I spent 3 weeks tracking down the prairie falcon everyone was seeing on the Sandwich Flats. Fortunately, it took time to pose for me. The good news about this prairie falcon's conservation status is its least concern, probably because of its ability to adapt to altered landscapes. So this one's doing pretty good. Deer falcon populations in North America seem stable, but the species has declined in parts of Arctic Europe. It is the world's largest falcon, and on its breeding grounds on the tundra, it preys upon large birds such as ptarmigan and waterfowl. It is rare to see them south of the Canadian border. How many people here have seen a deer falcon? Nice, nice, they're around. Nancy writes, I am a master gardener and I manage the meadow garden of our demonstration gardens. I always have my camera handy because the hummingbirds love my area. I didn't realize until I downloaded this image that I had captured a photo of a calliope hummingbird. And if you know anything about the ecology they prefer is mountain meadows. So that's probably why Nancy's getting it in her thing, but that's a pretty rare one around here. And Nancy writes, a fanciful composite I created from 4 images for my new granddaughter's bedroom. I will add to that. Congratulations, Nancy, on the new granddaughter. Jim Betts contributed a few. This is a green heron from Veracruz, and he wrote, all images are taken in Veracruz, Mexico in October of 2022. I used a Panasonic Lumix bridge camera. This photo was taken while walking down the road to Playa La Mancha. Here's an immature yellow-crowned night heron taken at Playa La Mancha. This is not generally considered a species of concern as its population size is very large and the range is wild and it has a stable trend. This is a tri-colored heron taken at Playa La Mancha. Jim writes, this bird is fishing by spreading its wings to create a shadow and then snatch the fish when they swim into it. I add that this is not an uncommon fishing strategy for tropical herons. The reddish heron also fishes this way. By the way, if you're ever birding in the tropics and you see one of these and you're not sure if it's a tricolored heron or a great blue heron, look at the flanks. In the great blue heron, they're always rufous, and the tricolored heron, they're always white. So that's diagnostic. A squadron of brown pelicans taken at Playa Juan Angel, Johnny Angel Beach. These birds were considered endangered prior to the EPA's ban on DDT in 1972. Their recovery has been so successful that brown pelicans were delisted in 2009, and they are now considered a species of least concern. However, Audubon, California, which conducts an ongoing brown pelican count along the West Coast, there is concern there that the breeding productivity is down right now, probably because of the collapse of the anchovy fishery. We'll have some more. Brown pelicans are doing an interesting thing in our area, so we're going to see more of these birds as we go through. Now, this is, Jim wrote, this was the reason for his trip, river of raptors in Veracruz. Imagine you are sitting in a white plastic lawn chair and looking up at the sky with your binoculars. What you will see there is a stream of birds moving more or less south. In 1 hour, it is not uncommon to see more than 10,000 raptors. 5 years, I was a volunteer with the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory in California. We thought we were having a really good day if we ever hit an hour where we got 100. That was a day to write home about, 10,000. Okay. And this next one is a fine, he says, this is Jim's writing, a fine kill of birds. The migration of the river is from one thermal to another, where the birds are gaining altitude. The sight is amazing. When the kettle is right overhead, it looks like this. These are all raptors. And I hope you can see the kind of the swirly patterns in here of these birds. They try to migrate flapping as little as possible to save energy. So they're always going to find a thermal and then glide down to the next one. Thank you, Jim. Next, we have some photos by Ernie Hayden He writes, Ginny and I were doing our usual daily drive around March's Point, and we came across this juvenile eagle atop a telephone pole. He was airing / drying his wings. I think this is a neat shot. It's obviously a wet bird. I'm thinking that might be a second-year subadult, not a juvenile. January 22nd, 2020, atop Anthony's restaurant in Cap Sante Marina, Anacortes. He writes, this fellow was on the southeast corner of Anthony's restaurant. He was overlooking the marina and the restaurant dumpster, perhaps looking for small morsels. Actually, great blue herons spend a lot of the day just kind of chilling out. But that's a good restaurant for the smells. Maybe he was just enjoying that. Ernie writes, this grouchy and selfish eagle was enjoying a freshly caught rabbit atop a telephone pole. We saw it as we were driving east on North Texas Road, and he didn't look like he was willing to share. January 24th, 2022, during our daily tour around March's Point, we came across this black oyster catcher a la rock in Padilla Bay. He was monitoring the water for food. Interestingly enough, he tells us, oyster catchers do not eat oysters. And he's right about that, that the oyster catcher is misnamed. It would be better to be called the intertidal marine invertebrate catcher. It also eats bivalves such as mussels, but also consumed other mollusks such as limpets, chitons, and whelks. It also eats crabs, urchins, isopods, and barnacles, but not oysters. March 5, 2022, this elusive creature was sitting atop some old weathered pilings in the marsh. It is very rare we see the kingfishers at all, and they are normally in trees near the water to catch their prey. By the way, can you tell that this is a male kingfisher?
No red band.
No red band. The female has a second belt, and it's one of the few birds where the female is more colorful than the male. We don't know why. We'll see some female kingfishers later on in the show. Look for that rufous band. Still Ernie writing, this is taken in February this year, atop telephone pole near Olympic Pipeline Pumping Station, March's Point, North Texas Road. I was very fortunate to be able to zoom in on this eagle with my 600mm. Several eagles were concentrated on the poles at the pumping station. By the way, if you've ever wondered why raptors look grouchy, is because the brow ridge, as the eyes move forward to get binocular vision so they can judge distance, which a bird of prey has to do, that's just kind of a natural thing. It also helps protect their eyes. You see, a pigeon has, peripheral vision, no brow ridge.
They can grouchy.
This was taken in April this year. He writes, there are 2 or 3 vultures in a cow pasture apparently looking for food, perhaps afterbirth from the cows. This vulture was caught just landing in the field. By the way, for those new to the identification of turkey vultures, we can tell that this is an adult because it has a red head and a white bill, an ivory bill. Juveniles have gray head and a black bill. Thank you, Ernie. Rosie Jansen has some neat shots in our show this year. This is from the Green Bank Farm on Whidbey Island, and she notes that this barn swallow nest was in the wine tasting area above a table where customers were sipping their wine. Here's a fun fact. According to Cornell University's Birds of the World database, the barn swallow is the most abundant swallow in the world. It breeds throughout most of North America and Eurasia and overwinters in Central and South America, southern Spain, Morocco, Egypt, sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, India, Indochina, Malaysia, and Australia. Again, Rosie writes that this was a female kingfisher by the bridge, and while he slew, she adds, before the vegetation was ruined along the trail. But here you can see over here that the rufous band that indicates a female. By the way, if you ever come by a kingfisher roost like this, you can look on the ground for pellets. It's very similar to owl pellets, and you can take those apart and tell what it's been eating. One thing to remember when you're doing that is that their diets are seasonal. Of course, don't scare the kingfisher off its roost. Wait till it's gone. But you can look. I've had a few neat times with students just kind of picking those apart and seeing what was going on there. Evening grosbeak, female. A flock was coming through on their migration route and stayed for a few days. I think a lot of photographers have found that these are comparatively tame, and you can approach them to within several meters without scaring them off. Don't get closer than that. Female grosbeak. I think we have a few more shots of that later on in the show. Rosie writes, downy woodpecker fledgling, checking out our yard after finding the bird bath that flew away into the woods. How do you know it's a fledgling? Anyone?
That's on the top.
You know it's a fledgling because it's no longer in the nest.
Oh.
Sorry.
I
I knew it. Nobody else even tried it, so. Okay, Rosie again. Red-headed grosbeak male. These grosbeaks migrate to our yard. Often there will be 2 or 3 pairs nesting there. A little known fact about these birds is that both male and female black-headed grosbeaks sing, and they often do so from the nest. While the male his song is primarily territorial, it seems that the female song is which is a simplified version of the male song, is there to maintain family cohesion. But you don't get a lot of birds that do that. Both sing. A few around here. Rosie writes, brown pelicans. We took the minor island marine mammal tour with Exception Pass boat tour, and it was unusual to see them there. And Professor Farnsworth replies, it may be unusual to see brown pelicans around here now, but it won't be into the future. According to the National Audubon Society Climate Watch, these birds are expected to expand their range into the Salish Sea and the waters surrounding Vancouver Island in British Columbia, even under moderate warming trends. If the climate warms only by 1.5 degrees Celsius, the pelicans' range will expand 47%. At 2 degrees Celsius, it could expand 72%. At 3 degrees Celsius, it could expand a whopping 220%. One way or another, this photograph captures the beginning of an expansion for the brown pelican's range. Can anybody identify these skulls? Yeah. There's I think 3 second years and two years in there. Good, Tim. You should be our conservation chair. Rosie writes that the puffin was the only bird we went out to see, and we were happy that a few were not too far away from the boat. According to Dr. Trina Bayard, Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Washington, these are troubled times for the tufted puffin. When Washington State listed these birds as endangered in 2015, their population had declined at just under 3,000 birds, down from historic levels of around 25,000 birds 100 years ago. Puffins are sensitive to overall marine health, and their decline should continue to be a concern for Skagit Audubon. If there are canaries in our cold mine, their Latin name is Fratricula serrata. Thank you, Rosie. This was taken March 25th. She writes, Teresa writes, I stopped at the south end of Padilla Bay Trail off of Bayview Edison Road, where I noticed a flock of snow geese settling into the lake afternoon. I took a few quick shots when this fellow decided to come in for landing just as my shutter snapped. That's a metaphorical click as the phone, I took the phone with my Samsung cell phone. Pretty good for a cell phone shot, huh? We should have a whole division. I know it's not a competition, but that cell phone shot, this might be a runner. Thank you, Teresa. Jeff Sinker, who's with us today. All right. Wood duck, Juanita Bay Park and Kirtland. This wetland within the city limits harbors a lot of wildlife and many species of birds, Jeff writes. Wood ducks congregate on the water along the boardwalk trail and are easy to see and photograph. All right, you ready for a quiz? Wood ducks are the most successful breeders among North American species of cavity nesting ducks. What are the other 6 species of cavity nesting ducks? Come on, you can work together. Give me one. Bubblehead. All right, stay in that genus, Bucephala, and you'll get 2 more. Barrow and common golden eyes, so we've got the whole Bucephala. Somebody say Morganza, which one? Common and hooded, and very sometimes the red breasted one. Good work. You see, that wasn't a hard quiz. Snow geese for island. This is Jeff writing again. I think snow geese is part of a large flock feeding on a field on Fur Island. I always enjoy the return of these geese every fall. The Skagit Valley birds breed on Wrangel Island in eastern Russia. It is quite a spectacle to see flocks of 10,000 plus birds taking off and then landing again on a, whoops, wrong button, on a field of corn stubble. Have you been to Wrangel Island? I see them there. Let's make that a field trip next year. Colleen, are you with us? Yeah, let's wait a year. That's right. Never mind, never mind. Orca whales. On a whale watching trip in September of 2022, we saw several transient orca whales, Jeff writes. The whales can be individually identified by the saddle pouch on their backs, which is unique to each whale. Transient whales eat marine mammals in contrast to the southern resident orcas that eat salmon. Both populations share the same habitat without food competition. So nice that you're writing some natural history on this. I didn't have to do anything with your slides. I set that little quiz. Yeah. Jeff writes, this is one of my favorite shorebirds, and this bird was feeding close to the dike trail at Wiley Slough outside of Conway. Both Wiley and Hayden reserves are great places to see these shorebirds. Their long bills, yellow legs can probe deep into the mud for worms, and I've also seen them catch small fish. And I have, and the only place I've ever seen that is at Wiley. Interesting. Snowy egret, Cabrillo National Monument, Point Lone. I took this photo at Cabrillo National Monument while visiting my daughter and son-in-law in May. These birds are everywhere water is found, including both fresh and saltwater habitats. They eat a variety of marine foods, and this one appeared to be fishing for lunch while perched on the rocky coastline. In California, where I used to teach birding, we always knew how do you know a snowy from a great egret? Well, the great egret has a yellow bill and black feet, and the snowy has a black bill and yellow feet. It really works unless they're in the mud. Great blue heron in Juanita Bay Park in Kirtland. Jeff writes, I photographed this bird at Juanita Bay Park in Kirtland. The heron was fishing in the wetland next to the boardwalk trail, and it was very successful. This is one of several fish the heron caught. Being accustomed to people, it was comfortable hunting close to the walkway. Fish and frogs are the main sources of food for these large herons. Although they'll also eat voles if they're in a meadow. I've seen. Black bear, we're just getting us a little off the world of animals here. On Mother's Day 2022, Mary and I were driving out of Sol Duck in Olympia. Is that, what is it? Sol? In Olympic National Park, on our way to Rialto Beach when we spotted this bear feeding next to the roadside. We were able to spend several minutes watching the bear from the car. Upon our return, hours later, we believe we saw the same bear again feeding in almost the same location. Thank you, John. Yvonne is here? No?
She's online.
Because Nancy Colwell had a picture of a prairie falcon that was on, this is a budding poplar, and Nancy's was too. I was wondering if they were together or seeing the same bird. This was on Sullivan Road in January of 2022. The prairie falcon is uncommon to rare in our state. It has an overall pale color with dark wing pits, which are diagnostic. This is an adult because it has a yellow cere and it is more spotted and streaked on the front. It feeds mainly on small mammals, but also takes birds and insects. Move on with that. Yeah, if I saw one of these, I'd really want to check my medications. Okay. Yvonne writes, these beautiful iridescent blue pheasants are sometimes released by hunters and they are able to survive in the wild. They are often called melanistic mutants by breeders, which is incorrect because melanistic birds are largely black due to an excess of the black pigment melanin. Blue pheasants are just dark birds with an iridescent blue or green sheen. Still. Has anybody else seen these? Am I the only one that's like, yeah. Oh, and here's another really crazy shot by Yvonne. Sanderlings March Point. Sanderlings. In non-breeding season, sanderlings are commonly found along sandy beaches on the outer coast. Seeing 6 of them foraging at March Point is quite unusual. And I have to say too, I've never seen sanderlings but I checked it on the Birds of the World, and they do occasionally are found on rocky shoreline. So I wouldn't have even known to look at them and say, what are these pieces that were sanderlings? As our most cosmopolitan sandpiper, its breeding range is circumpolar, and during the non-breeding season, it may be found at almost any sandy beach on the planet. Still Yvonne here with Rimbles. Sorry, Rimbles. I'm trying to read too fast. I counted more than 100 Wimbrels, Yvonne writes, when I walked the beach at Whidbey Island. It was the first time I saw a Wimbrel, but I recognized it immediately because of its long down-curved bill. Their main foods are marine invertebrates like crabs and mussels, and their bill is well adapted to that. And I can only add, happy lifer Yvonne. We have a number of people that had lifeless birds in their submissions this year. Pacific slope flycatcher. Von Rice was in her anacortes yard in August. Flycatchers are hard to identify and are best distinguished by voice and habitat. I heard them many times in the forest in the spring. However, when I noticed this bird sitting silently in my garden at the end of August, I wasn't sure what it was, and taking this photo helped me with the identification later on.
Nice.
So you can really, it's a lot easier to tell it by sound than Neil did all kinds of bird calls last year, and this is my only one. Hopefully he'll be back next year. Still Yvonne, ground pelicans, Long Beach Peninsula. On the trip to the Long Beach Peninsula, we enjoyed seeing a lot of brown pelicans flying by, closely above the waves. Also watching them dive for fish was a lot of fun. I made many photos. This was at Hayton Reserve. Yvonne writes, American avocets are elegant and large sandpipers. In the spring, I photographed a beautifully colored bird in breeding plumage. In the beginning of September, there were two avocets at Hayton Reserve. One was already in non-breeding plumage, black and white, and the other was still a little bit colored. Here's a quick quiz. These birds are both males. How could I determine if they were female?
The markings on the wings are different.
The female has a more upward bill. The male will have a slight one. The female will go kind of way up. Event on it. Right. Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, now we're to Catherine O'Hara, who I think they're just coming back from Costa Rica. That's why Neil's not at the podium tonight. Neil and I decided to explore the desert cities area of Southern California as our winter break last January. We found the Salton Sea area to provide lots of birding opportunities. This says Phoebe cooperated with a classic pose in beautiful late afternoon light. You're gonna see some really nice photographic technique here in Catherine's stuff, like that nicely blurred background there. She writes, I think Western meadowlarks are beautiful birds, but I have only had a few chances to see them. Imagine my delight when we found a small flock feeding in an otherwise boring field. I was even more thrilled to capture one in flight. We saw, this is still Catherine writing, we saw a lot of black-tailed gnatcatchers while we were visiting the Salton Sea, but they moved fast and usually darted in and out of shrubbery. While I was happy to catch this one in perfect light against a blue sky, I'm not sure if the thorn above its head is very large or the bird is very small. And I can help Catherine with that because this is a velvet mesquite, which will grow thorns up to 3 inches. I think that was just slightly more than an inch. But yeah, that's certainly a southwestern plant there. Catherine writes, I love these little quails with their fancy top knots. The Gamble's quails we saw in Southern California were similar to the California quails we often see in anacortes, with some differences in color and decoration. This little fellow was of course running to catch up with his family. This is really one of my favorite photographs in this whole show. Catherine writes, we have only rarely seen long-billed curlews before, so it was a big treat to find a very large flock of them, perhaps 100 birds, feeding close to the road. With all the feeding activity, though, it was hard to catch even one with its enormous beak clear of the grass. And so she says she caught 3. Nice, isn't that a nice shot? That's just... Catherine still, we found these local goldfinches in Big Morongo Canyon Preserve, a desert oasis in the Little San Bernardino Mountains between the Mojave Desert and the Colorado Desert. Their flashes of yellow were tinged with green, and they were quite cooperative photographic subjects. This particular one seems to have been a messy eater. He's the little gull waving. Of all the birds we saw during our Southern California trip, these were my favorites, Catherine writes. The male and even more striking female, Phainopepla, they normally have their elevated crest. They normally have their crest elevated, so it's not a sign of distress. And who could resist the glare of those ruby red eyes? And it seems that Mr. Phainopepla really thinks he's more striking than she is. But Catherine disagrees. Paul Anderson, I just need to pause here. We don't even look at this one. Paul sent a thing in, was it this morning?
Yes.
It was this morning after we had already finalized and downloaded the thing, and he caught a picture of a Bewick's swan yesterday, which is why he was late on it, and we just couldn't fit it in. Bewick swan is a subspecies now of tundra swan, and it has a lot more yellow on at the base of the bill than a normal tundra swan. They used to be separate species in 1983. They were lumped. So hopefully he'll send that shot into next year's program. So here we have dunlins on Birch Bay. Paul writes, a flock of wintering dunlin takes evasive measures to avoid someone at Birch Bay State Park in November of 2021. You notice he says someone, and it's not hard to guess who that someone is. Dunlin mortality is highest in the winter and usually happens at the hand of avian predators, especially falcons. You have to be pretty fast to catch a dunlin. Paul describes this as a flock of pelicans roosting in the early morning haze on the farm August of 2022. Here's a fun fact. American white pelicans hunt cooperatively, working together to herd fish so that they can scoop them up with their bills while swimming. It's been observed that their prey capture rate tends to be much higher when working with conspecifics than when foraging alone. Unlike brown pelicans, they do not plunge dive. Plunge dive. So a brown pelican will go into the water and come up, and these guys don't do that. They fish from resting in the water. You're welcome. Paul writes, a large flock of snow geese was feeding out on the bay when a bald eagle passed overhead, sending many of the snow geese into the air. The morning sun was shining to the south, just behind a solid deck of clouds, October of 2022. The sun breaks through the clouds on a foggy morning as trumpeter swans head into the fields after roosting on Skagit Bay, January of 2021. And I'm going to add, in 1935, due to the hat trade, only 69 trumpeter swans were known to exist in the contiguous United States. Between then and now, there has been a 1,000-fold increase in their numbers thanks to their protected status, proof positive that conservation moves. And a lot of that was from Audubon saving these. I'm sorry, Paul writes, a male northern harrier cruises by almost at eye level on the grassy fields at Fort Casey, April 22. And I think we saw that bird last month, the same bird. Am I lying, Carol? Harriers tend to nest in tall grass, and the males bring most of the food to the nest during both incubation and nesting. If you are in the vicinity of a nest, watch the male closely because he will usually transfer the prey to the female in a mid-air drop. This practice is cultivated during their courting period. Paul writes, while waiting for the ferry to depart the Kingston Slip, I photographed this double-crested cormorant perched on one of the dolphins in the ring. This, yeah. A great blue heron, Paul writes, had been fishing in a tidal pool at Laquay Island when a second heron decided to fish the same pool. The first bird apparently took offense at the intrusion and flew a circle around the pool, landed, and then walked around with its wings fully extended. Herons will sometimes dive with their feet. I guess jump into the, they will catch that way, and that might have been what was happening there. Fascinating behavior that Paul's describing here. Thank you, Paul. Joe Halton, who was my salvation when I did the Osprey talk a couple months ago, and he supplied so much of the slides there. So thank you. And He writes, while walking in Washington Park in September and October, I encountered this leucistic song sparrow. I was able to photograph the bird on several occasions, in this case, on October 10th. Here's a fun fact. Leucism occurs in 1 out of every 30,000 birds, and yet the British Trust for Ornithology estimates that it's 82% more common than true albinism. So now I'm saying 1 out of every 30,000 birds is leucistic, and Joe's going to provide us with a whole series of leucistic. Leucistic American robin that visited our Cap Sante yard in November 8th, 2022. The robin was part of an influx of dozens of robins seeking free-flowing water on the morning of our first freeze. And I think this is the same robin. These photos are of a leucistic robin that visited. Oh no, that's, yeah, sorry, same writing. I think it's the same bird. Still Joe's photography here, a very thrush. This was the first appearance of a very thrush in our yard on Cap Sante this fall. The male was accompanied by a shyer female that I wasn't able to photograph as well. Photograph was taken in October of this year. Interesting, the latest terminology about these is they're being called partial migrants. Birds, internal birds inland will do still the leapfrogging type of migration, but the coastal birds tend to descend from the mountains because they feed on the ground. So once the snow is too deep to really get what they're looking for, they'll come down and then they'll go back up. So that's what they're calling now partial migrants. Joe again, I spent many hours photographing several species of birds eating berries in local madrone trees this fall. On October 26th, I photographed this European starling in a madrone tree in the Cap Sante neighborhood. Thank you. A Bewick's wren. In November of this year, Joe writes he was on Cap Sante photographing birds eating madrone berries high above me when I was surprised to notice this Bewick's wren in a barberry bush directly in front of me at eye level. I watched it pluck a ladybug type insect from the leaves and ate it. But that's another photo. And I think it's cool. He gives us not only the natural history of the bird, but then he identifies the bush. And I'm going to say to Joe, next year you should identify that insect too. Thank you, Joe. Wes Jensen. This male evening grosbeak graced our deck last May. We only get them sporadically and are thrilled when they throw up. And I write, you should be thrilled, Wes. The evening grosbeak is highly secretive during the breeding season. Its courtship takes place without elaborate song or display. Its somewhat minimalist nest being high up in the trees. Therefore, comparatively little is known about this species' life history. You see one in the breeding season, you're lucky. Wes writes, female snow bunting was at the Stanwood Edie Road Preserve in January of 2021. They have been seen around here this year as well. I write, that's a great shot of a female in non-breeding plumage. I'm thinking I am the only one in Skagit Audubon who hasn't seen a snow bunting in the last year. Am I right? How many of you have seen snow buntings recently? Oh, okay, there's a few of us out there. I don't know what's up there. The last one I saw was in the Cairngorm Mountains of Scotland. Joe writes, a male Wilson's warbler was a pleasant surprise in our yard in August. Always a great day when you have a visiting warbler. Here's a fun fact about the Wilson's warbler. Most perching birds, songbirds, once the nestling leaves the nest, once it fledges, it disperses, it never comes back. Wilson's warblers will return to the nest for 2 or 3 days after fledging before dispersing. We have no idea why they do that. Wes writes, a female sooty grouse grouse seen along the trail above Paradise at Mount Rainier last month. It was very tame and approachable. The forest grouse hunting season was shortened this year for all 4 species of grouse native to Washington State in order to reduce the harvesting of breeding age hens. The fact that this breeding age hen didn't seem to get that memo indicates that hikers might have been feeding it. And it's right by the parking lot. This sort of feeding is never good news for the birds, especially prey animals like grouse. Beautiful, beautiful bird. Wes writes that short-eared owls are showing up again. This one was from last February at Crockett Lake on Whidbey Island. Still Wes, this green-winged teal was from this month, November, at the Skagit Wildlife Area, Wiley Slough. Here's an interesting little thing. Some people say that the green-winged teal is the smallest duck in North America. And some people say that the bufflehead is the smallest duck in North America. Who's right? Well, they both are. This is the smallest dabbling duck. The bufflehead's the smallest diving duck. The green-winged teal is about that much longer, and the bufflehead has a little more mass. It's a little heavier. So they're both the smallest. I had to look at this a whole bunch of times, and then I finally read. Wes says, this bald eagle appears to be waving, but another is spreading its wings behind. So you've got this bird with that wing, and this bird's just kind of, oh, that was almost as hard as looking at that blue pheasant. Getting a little blurry there. Thank you, Wes. Okay, Ron Holmes. A bald eagle nest tree silhouette arises sunrise sky with waning crescent moon. Photo taken on Butler Flats on January 29th, 2022. Can you see that there's also, I guess that's Venus up there, huh? Yeah. We're just getting, and this is shown as being by Ron and Alice. I guess they took it collaboratively. Northern pintail with emergent vegetation and estuary at Fur Island on Fur Island Farm Reserve. Photo taken in February. And then it just, that wouldn't work with a green wing teal. This photo needed a northern pintail. This is from Whidbey Island, a short-eared owl flying over driftwood along the seashore. Photo taken February 13th, 2022. Clouds at sunset from Samish Neck. Photo taken in March. Wait till you see this next one. Black and white, Mount Baker dressed in its winter coat with cloud muffler wrap. Photo taken March 6, 2022 from March 1. Isn't that gorgeous? You know, our Ansel Adams photo. Yeah. Portrait of a common raven, Ron writes, a bird that I feel a special admiration for. Photo taken on October 10, 2022 in British Columbia. I love the brokaw in the background too. It's just spectacular. And another one by Ron and Alice. Sunrise silhouettes of land, water, and sky. Photo taken on November 16, 2022 from Fur Island Farm Reserve. Thank you, Ron and Alice. We're going to have something a little different here by none other than our own Ann Pitzel. Ceanothus silk moth. She gives us a description of the moth photo process. A bug zapper with a zapper removed is placed in front of a white sheet on a clothesline. The light is left on all night and moths checked early the next morning, April through October. They come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. These photos are taken at her Camano Island home with an iPhone. Moths are identified using the Peterson's Pacific Northwest Insects Field Guide, also bugguide.net, or the Seek app. Ceanothus silk moth is large, 43 to 76 millimeter forewing length. The larvae feed on many different trees and shrubs, often Douglas firs. So that's not a bird. Columbian emerald moth, 13 to 18 millimeter forewing length in forested areas, region-wide. Larvae feed on various broadleaf trees and shrubs. A deceptive sallow moth, 18 to 19 millimeter forewing length, found in moist forest. Larvae feed on Douglas fir needles. Great tiger moth, 27 to 32 millimeter forewing length. In open grassy leaves and forest, larvae feed on leaves of various herbs and broadleaf shrubs. Morning glory plume moth, 12.5 to 14 millimeter forewing length, region-wide. Larvae feed on plants in morning glory and tomato family. And I couldn't figure out, we're missing some legs on this guy, I think. Or is it just me?
I think they're folded along.
I think that's.
Is that it? Oh, back here.
Yeah.
These are, oh, yeah, okay. Right. I don't think I've ever seen this one.
That's strange.
Yeah. Polyphemus moth, large, 44 to 68 millimeter forewing length, region-wide. Larvae feed on leaves of wide variety of broadleaf trees and shrubs. And finally, the Virginia tiger moth, up to a 25 millimeter forewing length, region-wide. Larvae feed on leaves of many herbs and broadleaves. Thank you, Pam. We have Ken writes, a bald eagle taken on the North Fork of the Nooksack Mosquito Lake Road, Christmas Day of 2015. We're getting some older shots of Ken's. This adult eagle just dropped in between gravel bars to feed on spawning salmon. Snowy owl. He writes correctly, that's a juvenile female. You're seeing that barring again. Taken near Drumheller, Alberta, Canada, February of 2016. The snowies in this area are not part of an eruption, but are not numerous. Taken with a Nikon 800. I think all these shots are almost all of them took with a 400 millimeter f2.8.
And as you don't point out, I didn't know what to like, so you can skip all the data.
Oh, I like it. I like it. That's right. Ken is our new member here, newish. Same time here. Ridgway's rail. This is near threatened, federally endangered, taken at Baylands Nature Reserve, Palo Alto, California, my old stomping grounds. Banded bird with 2 bands on one leg and 3 on the other. Rufus hummingbird, taken at Big Rock Park in Bellingham. The image was captured the day before her chick fled in May of 2012. Great shot. Black-throated gray warbler, male, taken in my backyard, he says, in Bellingham. A regular visitor to the stream along with many Wilsons and some Townsend warblers. You get 3 warblers in your backyard and a stream. That's just not fair. Oh, okay. But that's a real bird.
I have all 3 of them together.
Wow, wow. We're gonna go come visit. We'll have a bird hike just in your backyard. Oh, no. Another barn swallow, taken at the far end of Semiahoo Spit on in June of 2018. For years, he writes, I was unable to get a good shot of a barn swallow, but this guy made up for it. That's for sure. Great egret taken at Paddon Lagoon in Wellingham in 2015 in November. After several visits to the lagoon, after the bird was reported, I got lucky. This egret kept on getting closer as I was shooting and also enabled me to get some good flight shots. But this is my favorite. Thank you, Ken. Okay. Monica Liebers. This very thrush and family were frequent visitors in our neighborhood this summer. I was inspired to restart my bird photography by this bird in my backyard. I have a Canon PowerSat Super Zoom, not the best for photos, but good for my budget. And then she shows us this great shot. This is a Skagit Audubon field trip to Washington Park in Anacortes. She says they were kind enough to pose. And I had a fun flag. This duck is the only North American waterfowl that breeds on clear, fast-flowing rivers and streams. Like the American dipper, they forage in turbulent water and are able to harvest insect larvae from the rocky bottoms. They migrate to the coast after breeding, where they occupy the intertidal zones of rocky shorelines. They are, in my opinion, the world's coolest ducks. Barn owls. We got to Ann Kramer now. 3 barn owls made a home in one of the 3 of the old vacated buildings. They sat in the high arches of the corner, and although several in our group took photos, they seemed unruffled and beautiful. My first barn owl sighting. Male on the left, right? Paler, female. That's really classic. Male, female barn owls. They will vary somewhat sometimes. Anne writes, a regular visitor in my backyard, I rescued a northern flicker from its clutches one day. Although the flicker was relieved, the Cooper's hawk was not. He returned, I'm not sure that this is a he returned dissatisfied and buckled from the miscapture. Undaunted by my presence, it flew right over my head as if to warn me never to do that again. I love this image, though a simple portrait, it displays the beautiful feathered details of the possibility of irritation with my interference. I don't know if you know that as far as the reverse size dimorphism, where the females are larger, this is the most reverse size dimorphic hawk in the world, the Cooper's hawk. The female is a fully 1/3 larger than the male. So for the male, especially because the coastal population of Cooper's hawks are smaller than interior, that's not going to be that much bigger than a flicker. So I'm betting this was a female. Bald eagle with some food scraps in flight. I'm trying to figure out, that doesn't seem like a normal mold there. It's not eating. Being quite envious of those who had evening grosbeak visitations, I leapt to my feet when I saw this one in my backyard. But it was a momentary visit, but I was grateful nonetheless. Did you know that the evening grosbeak derived from a mistaken notion that they only arrived in the evening? And the guy who discovered that was wrong was William Cooper, who the Cooper's hawk is named after. The Latin name is Fringilla vespertina. See the vesper part there, which would mean evening finch. And he used this name on speculation because it had been shot by an arrow, his first specimen by a Native American boy, and he just named it evening hawk. And then people started saying it only comes in the evening, but they're actually very noisy during the day. European starlings. I am not one, Anne writes, who is irritated at the birds some might consider pests. To me, they are wily survivors, and for a brief time in the spring, they visited my feeders. I was astonished at their ability to work in a group, although they seem to quarrel all the time, much like some families. Western tanager and Emile, I was graced with a visitation of not 1, not 2, but around 15 Western tanagers during 3 days during the spring migration. We could hardly believe our eyes and our good fortune. They tolerated my presence well, and I was able to amass numerous poses. Maybe we should all just take field trips to her yard and stand. All these stand with shots. Wimble worm grab, she writes, my friend Pam Pitzel informed me of a flock of wimbles feeding on a nearby stand with farmland. I was able to see them before they moved on and capture them from my car. It was especially amusing to see how the worms wrapped themselves around their long beaks, although I expect that the worms were not amused. Thank you, Anna. Okay, here's a weird one. A cropped low contrast version of snow geese in the Samish Flats, a shot I'd entered in last year's Skagit Audubon photo show, ended up on the cover of a scholarly journal this summer. I like this shot because it reminds me of grad school at Stanford. Absolute chaos. This is shot last Saturday at Rosario Beach in good 25, 30 knots of wind, very gusty. And if you can see that was straight up and it bent over. And that's why that eagle's pushing the wings forward like that. I just like the behavior. Thank you, me. Neil, and I think this was written by Catherine. So Neil took the picture, Catherine wrote the caption, I think. The high contrast between dark and light plumage on this ring-necked duck makes it hard to photograph well. Neil likes this image because feather detail can be seen in both areas. The iridescent sparkles too, and for once, the ring around the neck that gives the bird its name is visible. And by the way, a lot of hunters don't call this ring-billed. The ring-necked duck, they call it ring-billed. And I think that's I'm going to start doing that. Rarely do you really get to see where that ring is on his face. Look at this shot. Sometimes photographers just get lucky, and I think this is his wife writing this. This rufous hummingbird spent a couple of minutes flexing its wings long enough for me to set up the camera and take the shot. Most of the time, the feathers were moving so fast they would have come out blurry, but the bird held disposed just long enough for me to capture it. And I'm wondering if that's like a territorial gorget display. I don't know. I've never seen it. Look at the way that the tail flares there. It's really interesting behavior. To Neil, Catherine writes, this barn swallow looks outraged. The expression reminds him of a scene from the movie Taxi Driver where Robert De Niro stands in front of a mirror and says, "You talking to me?" Perhaps this bird wanted a tip for allowing this picture to be taken. There you go. Now here's a really good shot of that female, that second rufous belt. Fur Island Farms in August. Anyone who has tried to photograph a belted kingfisher knows how hard it is to get close enough to these skittish birds. But this picture was taken from an iPhone from at least 50 feet away. The phone was attached to a spotting scope. So it's 60 times. Yeah, you were thinking, no way. You do. All right, white-crowned sparrow, Rosario Beach in October. Another lucky shot Neil didn't even know he had at the time, Catherine May. Several white-crowned sparrows were feeding near the path when he saw people who were oblivious walking toward the birds. Knowing the sparrows would fly off, he tried to follow one, and he thought he missed it. Later at home, he discovered this image of the bird in front. Lucky. While he slew, red-winged blackbirds don't seem to mind people getting quite close, although this bird is perhaps a bit skeptical. Or was the bird just modeling for Neil? Do you like this view, or this, or this? As he kept turning his head around. Either way, the expression enhances this picture of an otherwise common bird. Fur Island Farms in October. Neil caught this ring-billed gull as it splashed down in water calm enough to show its reflection despite a slight ripple. The bird immediately found something to eat just below the surface and kept its wings elevated while it ducked its head to grab a tasty morsel. Thank you, Neil. Okay, Mary Sinker. Mary writes, Butterbutt is a favorite nickname for these warblers. This male was very cooperative for photos at Wiley Slough last spring. I've only seen them during breeding season, but the Sibley's Guide shows a narrow strip in western Washington as permanent range, so I must look more closely for them in other seasons. Where I taught in Santa Clara and Silicon Valley, we only saw these in the winter. And I never knew they went. And the first time I went out with a Washington Park hike from us, I couldn't identify this bird. And then I realized that's my most common bird from home, but it's summer. Why am I seeing it now? Sunflowers are super important plants for pollinators. Bees can't get enough of this variety, sunsweet, and then copious amounts of seeds are produced for the birds to feed on during the fall. Growing a sturdy 4 to 5 feet high with medium-sized heads, these plants are perfect for smaller bird-friendly gardens. I found this variety through Territorial Seed Headquarters in Oregon. So we have a little bit of a gardening tip here.
That's great.
Another beautiful bird in Woodland Park Zoo. These ducks are indigenous to Korea, Eastern Russia, China, Japan, and Taiwan. Anywhere you get that temperate forest wetland. They form strong pair bonds and females initiate the courtship process. Females can be as much as 1 pound heavier than males, and mandarins are not typically hunted in the wild because their meat tastes bad. You have that on by report, right? Yeah, try it.
Fun fact.
Nice, nice. Thank you for that. Okay. We're getting exotic here, Mary. I love going to Woodland Park Zoo, she writes, and seeing birds that I'll never see in the wild. This male great Argus lives in the aviary next to the temperate forest wetland. His tail is 4 feet long. Found on the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, and Borneo, favorite foods include fruits, berries, seeds, insects, mealworms, fresh greens, and peanuts. Nice shot. We're really getting the pelicans. Mary loves pelicans and photographed these birds at Cabrillo National Monument in Point Loma, California, when visiting our daughter and son-in-law last May. She writes that permanent residents in Southern California, they are increasingly common during the summer months in the inner Puget Sound. They can be seen regularly during the summer patrolling the coastline in Olympic National Park. Can you tell which of the two adults? Yeah. More by Mary. For the last few years, a pair of these charming little birds has used one of the 3 available nest boxes that are located fairly close to the house. Wrens are among my favorite songbirds, she writes, and I enjoy watching them come and go during the nest building process. Mosses, feathers, bits of grass, and freshly shed horsehair are favorite birding materials. In my neighborhood in La Conner, across the street, we have an English sheepdog, and its fur has filled all my boxes. At our cabin out in the islands, it's all deer hair. So horsehair, why not? Mary photographed these bald eagles in Edison near the eagle tree last winter, and on this day, there were over 100 eagles in the immediate area. Another birder, she writes, told us that the leftovers in a nearby field were put out by a local farmer after he butchered pigs. Nothing was going to waste. And I can confirm these are pork-fed eagles. Mimi Simmons. Bird and Bear Tree, I guess that's the name of it. Yeah, Bird and Bear Tree was taken looking out our kitchen window in East Mount Vernon in December of 2021. She writes, I am not yet skilled at bird identification. Others may be able to name this bird from its profile. Crow? Anybody else? That's good. You should be able to identify from silhouettes. I've been learning that because I'm colorblind. So But yeah, I'd say that's a pro tip. Dramatic morning with swans was taken of the trumpeters from our front yard in November. And how would you know if those are trumpeters or tenders? Well, you would listen, right? Because the trumpeters are gonna bugle, and the tender swans have a much less sonorous. It's kind of a almost, I think, a quivering, more goose-like sound. Mimi writes, heron on rock at Cornet Bay was taken on August 2nd, 2022. A great blue heron, I think. And I think she's right. Fun fact that these herons usually feed according to the tides, with peak feeding taking place at low tide. So knowing that, I think that this bird was probably just resting, waiting for the water to come. Trumpeters in blue sky, Mount Vernon, taken from her front yard. And I just think, isn't it nice, everyone, to live in an area where you can photograph trumpeter swans from your front yard? Thank you, Mimi. Larry's, is it still south? Larry. All right, these are 5 photos that Larry took, and they're all taken on May 8th this year, about a half hour before sunset. Of the series, he writes, approximately a bazillion snow geese on the east side of the road, great light, plenty of birds in the air and on the ground. What luck, I parked, got out and started shooting. Before I knew it, the cry went up and a whole lot of them rose and headed for Samish Island. I'm always surprised how they are able to pull this off without mass casualties. Looking up, I was able to see the cause of so much commotion. An eagle, and not very much higher, was a lone snow goose. And he's going to narrate. This is all a series taken right. Then the dance begins, he writes. Round and round they flew, wider and wider, higher and higher, and closer and closer. And then, look at that. A move that would have made Steph Curry jump out of his shoes. Mr. Goose, in one quick but smooth motion, pulls up, turns inside Mr. Eagle, and then dives. By the time Mr. Eagle can react, Mr. Goose is 50 feet ahead of him. These 2 birds did this routine at least 4 more times, more than enough time for all the geese, including Mr. Goose, to disappear into the sunset. Mr. Eagle was last seen atop a nearby power pole. He looked like he was panting. I'm just reading the captions. Thank you, Larry. Okay. This next slide is my favorite to show. I know it's not a competition, but this is the one I want to hang on the wall in my study. Di Hoffman. That's got to go in a contest somewhere, you know? This, she writes, I love watching birds in and around my yard in Mount Vernon and trying to work on an identification key of flickers living in the area. I enjoy bird in flight and bird in life views and like this image of a male red-shafted flicker flying over my weeping cherries fall foliage. And if you have to ask why this is called red-shafted, you're just not looking close. Okay, she writes, in March, I glanced out the window and saw a couple big shadows landing on my feeder and thought guinea fowl from a nearby farm were coming in. Instead, I got to add 2 species to my list with band-tailed pigeons. Let's all wish Di a happy life. I like what she writes here. I like this image illustrating the size of these large pigeons. All About Birds describes them as, quote, a backwards relative of the ubiquitous rock pigeon, end quote. However, I think that makes them sound rather unsophisticated. I agree with Di. Rock pigeons are non-migratory and sedentary. Band-tailed pigeons are not only migratory, but are also nomadic. This gives each species a completely different personality. Another new bird for me, Di writes, was a yellow-rumped warbler flitting out of my Japanese maple in May. Fun fact, although these warblers warblers prefer to breed in coniferous habitats, they are among the most ecologically generalized species of all the warblers, able to forage via a variety of methods, from flycatching to foliage gleaning. It's no wonder they are one of the most widespread warblers on the continent. I like the white comma under the blue eyes. As a pair of adult male white-winged scoters synchronized during flight in the Drayton Harbor. I saw this while out on a harbor tour during the 20th annual Wings Over Water Birding Festival in March. If you're wondering why scoters have such a unique bill shape, it's that they can insert this slender tip inside a bivalve and open it. I never knew they had blue eyes, and I looked it up. Some of them don't. Some of them have white eyes too. Learn something in every photo show. Di writes, adult rhinoceros auklets in breeding plumage illustrate different wing positions in a flyby while I was on board with the Salish Sea School in May. And I had my Sibley field guide claims that these birds are, quote, almost always solitary at sea. This has certainly not been my experience in Rosario Strait, where I seldom see rhinoceros auklets alone. So Di has just proved my point. A closing image in pastel from our verdant Skagit Valley. Thank you, Di. This is Lisa. She writes, beavers get a bad rap from many property owners because they like to change the landscape, but they play a crucial role in creating and maintaining wetlands that are vital to many species of birds and other wildlife. This is one of the many beavers that live in the ponds in my neighborhood in Mount Vernon. A study done by the Wildlife Conservation Society finds that beaver dams double the bird populations. This is me. According to the Audubon Climate Watch, wood duck vulnerability to climate change is low. As the climate warms, they are expected to expand their range into British Columbia. Much of their summer range in eastern Washington, however, will be lost. Lisa writes, 2022 was the third year in a row I have seen Virginia rails in the same retention pond in my neighborhood. I only hear and see them in late spring through summer. This may be a nesting only site for them. This photo shows an adult with one black fuzzy chick. The most chicks I could ever see at one time were 5. Lisa writes, again, this past summer, I had 2 pairs of Western tanagers that regularly visited my backyard suet feeder. One pair stayed around until mid-August, so I'm pretty sure they were nesting nearby. The males, like this one, have such a stunning color that they're always fun to see. She continues, although I can hear Swainson's thrushes in my neighborhood almost daily in the late spring and summer, I don't often see them. They really like the treetops. It was a rare treat to find this young bird hopping around in someone's front yard. Starting in mid-May, I keep hearing weird squawking sounds in the cedar tree outside my bedroom window just after sunset as I was trying to go to sleep. Finally, in mid-June, I heard the noise on the golf course behind my house, and I went to investigate. There, I saw 2 juvenile great horned owls, one squawking, begging its parents for food. This photo was taken about half a mile away near a pond in late summer. I believe it's probably one of the same family of 4 that nested near my house. Lisa continues to write, no, this is not Christmas dinner. I see wild turkeys every time I visit my sister in Southern Oregon. They come through her property daily. This was the first time I had seen a male in full courtship mode. He was strutting his stuff for the ladies, but they seemed to be ignoring him.
Let you not say no women. I don't know what happened there. It's Oregon.
Oh yeah, your commentary says Southern Oregon. Well, yeah. Okay. Disqualify that photo. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. This program brought to you by Lisa, Mary, Carla, Catherine, and O'Neill. Let's give them a big hand. Big hand for all our photographers.
We have some questions from
Oh, do we?
the Zoom audience, or these comments, I guess, more comments and questions.
Well, why don't you go ahead?
Libby Mills says that our voices sound like we're back in the aquarium. And my comment to her is the age of aquarium. Diana, okay, she's talking about her pictures, very trush, mature and immature together. Oh, these are sightings. Very trush, mature and immature together in Mount Vernon. Or trumpeters on Big Beaver Lake in the ACFL, Good Day, in Libby. Paul Anderson, the Buick Swan on Bird Island. Mimi Simmons says we are new members. Mimi Simmons and my husband Steve Golden from Mount Vernon. Welcome, Mimi and Steve. Nancy Crowell says being Swan at Best Road, Moore Road today in a flock of trumpeters and thunders. Keith Weir says 35 plus meadowlarks on Dalsted Road yesterday. Unfortunately, about the same number of Eurasian collared doves today. It's the first year. And Nancy Crowell says, with regard to the prairie falcon, it was on Sullivan Road. I saw it and pulled over. Then several other people pulled in behind me. It's entirely likely we shot our bird images on the same day, although I did see it in that tree on a couple of other occasions after the first time I found it. Other people had spotted it in the area before the day I finally found it. And lots of people stating their appreciation, great show, great job, wonderful photos, and thanks for this spectacular show with very talented photographers. That was very enjoyable. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John, and thank you, John. And thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. And I just want to mention that next month, January 10th, we will have two people speaking to us remotely. We're not going to be in person about the March Point Herring Reef project. So that should be really